Good evening, everyone. We want to welcome you as you're logging in. My name is Charlene Margot, co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are so excited to have you with us tonight, and even more excited to have with us Dr. Madeline Levine, who is famous in the field. So again, we're just delighted. I know we're going to take a few seconds to log in, but I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Adrian Peterson, who, as you know, is the principal here at St. Matthew's School. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the parents for joining. I can see the numbers and you're all still jumping in. I was rolling in, as you all know. Today we had another principal of the day. So I was a student and I went to gymnastics and PE. So I was rolling, but some of you are still kind of rolling in. But we're going to start here in a minute or two. I am super excited that St. Matthew's Catholic School has this exclusive evening opportunity with Madeline Levine, because she is so well known in her field. It is just, I know it's going to be a fantastic evening. For some of you who are joining, and as we continue to see our numbers climb, we are super excited to welcome you to another evening with the Parent Education Series. Charlene and I were talking, we've been partnering for over 3 to 4 years now together, and every one of her presenters has been phenomenal. I have no doubt that tonight will be another exceptional evening. I know we're going to have a dynamic speaker. I appreciate you coming to this meeting. We work in partnership with you. We always all learn something, whether you're the principal or a parent or a teacher, we always all learn from these things. I love all the work Charlene and her company are doing, and I'm super excited to sit back and relax and hear our great presenter tonight. So it looks like our numbers are almost all in. So I'll turn it back over to Charlene.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson, for that really warm welcome. Again, as she mentioned, this is, I think, the 4th year that we've partnered with St. Matthew's School, and it is just such an honor to be here tonight, especially with Dr. Madeline Levine, who is one of my personal heroes. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But first of all, I want to say, you know, this could not be a more timely topic. We think Madeline must have had a crystal ball when she wrote her new book, Ready or Not, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Uncertain and Rapidly Changing World, because this book was envisioned and written prior to the pandemic. So we're going to be talking a lot about that tonight, but I just wanted to tell you that it is an amazing topic because, as we know, things are still changing. So, and we want our kids to thrive and succeed and do well, all of us as parents. So we couldn't be more excited about tonight's topic. We want to say a big thank you to St. Matthew's School, and especially to Principal Adrian Peterson, without whose support we would not be here. Again, a special thank you to Dr. Levine. I'll be telling you about her in a minute here. First of all, tonight's format, for those of you who are familiar with Zoom, and I know most of you are, this is a webinar. So we have 2 ways for you to interact with us. There is a chat button. My co-founder, Bev Hartman, will be putting resource links in the chat. You can talk to one another, you can talk to us through that, but we'd like you to put your questions, which you can put in anytime, in the Q&A button. So resource links, comments in the chat, questions that you'd like us to answer in the end at the Q&A, in that Q&A button, please. We are going to have an interview style tonight. So I'm going to be talking with Dr. Levine about her book and some of the questions that are most relevant to you as the parent community here. So we are just, again, eager to hear from you and know that you're as excited as we are to have this conversation tonight. This event is being recorded and will be available on our free video library. That link will be shared to you with you by Dr. Peterson as soon as the video posts. We actually partner with the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula for our videography. It usually takes them a couple days to get that ready. So let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about tonight's featured presenter. Madeline Levine, PhD, is a psychologist with close to 40 years of experience as a clinician, consultant, educator, and author. Her New York Times bestseller, The Price of Privilege, explores the reasons why teenagers from affluent families are experiencing epidemic rates of emotional distress. Her follow-up book, Teach Your Children Well, also a New York Times bestseller, tackles our current narrow definition of success, how it unnecessarily stresses talented kids and marginalizes many more whose talents and interests are less amenable to measurement. Her latest book that we will be focusing on tonight, Ready or Not, focuses on how to best prepare our children and ourselves for an uncertain and rapidly changing world. Her books have been translated into multiple languages. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome, everybody, for tonight's featured presenter, Dr. Madeline Levine. So Madeline, I know we go back probably close to a decade now through Challenge Success. Most of you know probably that Dr. Levine was a co-founder at Stanford's Challenge Success, an initiative of the Graduate School of Education. I was a board member for many years and board chair, so we got to know one another through that process.
So you have to stop calling me Dr. Levine because you're a friend. I know you for over a decade. So yeah.
All right. Well, with all respect, Madeline, if you would set the stage a little bit for us, tell us what brought you to this work as a psychologist, educator, and author.
Sure. First, I'd just like to thank the whole parent body who's come tonight. I was saying right before we started, that's incredibly unusual and really heartwarming in the sense that parents and teachers are collaborators, and there's tension in the world about parents and teachers. So I'm thrilled to be here, actually. How I got into this, and I think my particular story is not that interesting, but there's a piece of it that I think is. I never took a psychology course as an undergraduate. I was an English major. I was a teacher first, and I was a very, very bad teacher. And that is not hubris or anything like that or false modesty. I taught in the South Bronx of New York in a really tough neighborhood, and I just wasn't good at it. But what I was good at was going home with kids after school and sitting around the table with them, and it was always their mom, trying to figure out how to get out of school with a degree and how to go on in education and get out of that hood, actually. And that I was good at. And that's really how I ended up in psychology. So I didn't do it in undergraduate, and I went to a different graduate program, and I eventually ended up in psychology. And the reason I'd like you to know this story is because I think there is a huge myth about what it takes to be successful. I said to Dr. Peterson, I loved looking at the website because most websites that I look at or places I'm invited to speak have numbers on them. And those numbers are always about where kids got into college or where kids got into high school. They're all metric-based evaluations of the school. And your website says service, which we'll hear more from me about why I think that's so critical. But I think it's really important to understand that most people in the world became successful not by following that straight line, not by having the first value on where all your kids are going to end up in high school. But, you know, if you look at it at one point in time, it's a photograph. If you saw me in a classroom, I was very unsuccessful. Learning what you're not good at is part of learning what you are good at. And I like it when parents understand that in my research, the vast majority of people did not take a straight line to whatever it is they're doing. And when I was in person, I have two slides. One slide is a straight line. And every place I spoke, which was hundreds, I asked how many people took that straight line. And regardless, I mean, this is extraordinary, regardless of where I was, whether I was in the local high school or at Goldman Sachs in Hong Kong, the number of people who knew what they wanted early on and went for it, studied hard, got into great schools, was 1 to 10%, leaving 90 to 99% of people who took what I call a squiggly path. But, you know, it wasn't that I was incredibly talented in psychology. It wasn't that I thought I would make money in psychology. It was a process of finding out what my strengths and weaknesses were. And I have one more thing to say about that, actually. And that is, I think as a general rule, we spend a little bit too much time looking at our kids' weaknesses. I came from a very working class background. There were no tutors or anything like that. And I'm grateful that my parents just allowed me to be the student I was, which was very good in English and very mediocre in math. Because in life, you know, we go to us, I'm a basketball fan, we go to our right, we go to our strengths. So it was a squiggly line. And the part about parenting was, I was in Marin for 30 years. I like how you say 40 years of experience. It's such a kind way, Charlene, of saying how old I am. You know, it's not.
It applies to me.
She has 40 years of experience. I was in Marin, and I was really taken by the fact that so many kids were in such distress. For reasons that really weren't clear. I mean, it was an affluent community with involved parents, and it was just curiosity, which later I'm going to say is one of the most important things I think you can, if you want to cultivate something in your kids, please cultivate curiosity. I was just curious, and I started writing to people around the country. Are you seeing this? I'm seeing like kids who should do really well, not doing well. And that led to The Price of Privilege. And that sort of launched that part of my career. Yeah. Okay, that was a long-winded answer, but somehow I think I answered how I got into psychology.
But I think that book truly was a game changer for all of us working with families, Madeline. I think it changed everybody's thinking. I really do. So thank you for that. Parents, if you haven't read it, it's still incredibly relevant. Unfortunately, I think we kind of thought we'd get these problems knocked, but we haven't yet. So Madeline, as I mentioned, unless you have a crystal ball, and maybe you do, how did you come to write, or what was the catalyst for Ready or Not, considering that we weren't in a pandemic yet?
Right. So that book came out, I think, 3 weeks before lockdown here in California. And no, we weren't in a pandemic. No, I did not have a crystal ball. But the changes, the necessity for change was there in black and white before the pandemic. And, you know, thank you for the kind words about my first book, about Price of Privilege, but here was the issue for me. That came out like 15 years ago. And then the other book came out about 8 years ago. And there were a battalion of us, most of whom you know, Charlene, because you bring in good speakers always. There were a battalion of us going around the country. Your kids should play more, service should be more important. You know, don't stay so focused on metrics. There's other ways of looking at kids. And the reality was, were things getting better? No, they were not better. They were worse. And you can imagine, you spend 15 years on a message and you see plenty of individual schools and individual parents and families taking that message to heart. But overall, the country's not. And so rates of anxiety, which were high when I wrote that, were higher. Rates of depression, which were high when I wrote that, were higher. So, you know, I kind of felt like I had two choices. One was to say I did my best and I'm old and I'm going to retire, or to say that's interesting. Like, what are we all missing, or are we missing anything? And so I decided to take a look at that. Like, why weren't things changing? And you know, my sources, as you know, were always mental health workers and educators. And so for Ready or Not, I decided I'd done enough talking to those people. And I wanted to talk to people who live in the middle of change. That's heads of corporations, that's heads of our military. And that's mostly who I spoke to for that book. And what it was such a confirmation of the fact that the world had changed. The military calls it VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And yet we hadn't really changed our parenting. We hadn't really changed our education. And then I had a notable personal experience, which was, so this is about 2.5 years before the book came out. And I was remortgaging my house, and I went to First Republic, my bank, and I happened to get the head of the department. And I have 3 sons. My youngest son, Jeremy, who's maybe 20 then, so it's a few more years more. But anyway, he wants to come with me. He's curious about what I do in a meeting like that. And so he comes with me, and Jeremy's just being Jeremy, you know, like he's just very kind, very empathic, notices everything kind of kid. And I'm in there doing the interview and talking with the head of mortgage financing for about 90 minutes. And out of that 90 minutes, Jeremy says 3 things. He looks at his watch and he says, "Mom, you know, I think your meter is going to expire. Can I put a quarter in?" And I say, "Sure." And then like an hour later, he says, "You know, it's expiring again. I'll put a quarter in." Okay. And I said, "Sure." And then right towards the end of it, I'm sure you can tell my voice is always raspy because I speak so much. And he said, "Hey, Ma," in a lull in the conversation, "I saw some tea and honey at the reception area. Would you like me to get you some?" And I said, "That would be great." And he turned to Carmen, the woman who was talking to me, and said, "Can I get some for you as well?" And she says, "Yes." That's it. 90 seconds out of 90 minutes. And I get my mortgage, and she turns to my son and says, "I'd like to offer you a job." And, you know, my mouth kind of fell open. And I was curious, there's a theme here, about, she didn't know a thing about him. She didn't know if he was in college or not. She didn't know if he was interested in pottery or fish or finance or anything. And so I asked her, I said, "You know, I'm just kind of curious, what made you make that offer?" And she said, "I can teach a kid all the skills that they will need to sit in the office next to me. I can't teach them to get me tea when I have a sore throat. So I would like him to be the person sitting next to me." And that story, I don't know what word to use. It made me understand on a personal level, not just on research and talking to the head of the Navy, how real this was, that the values that were being, that were being valued in corporate, that was corporate America, had changed. And in the research in the book, I have many examples of the head of hiring at LinkedIn saying the exact same thing. We can teach skills. We can't teach collaboration, creativity, empathy, compassion. So I got that from absolutely everybody that I spoke to, which is not to say there isn't a small area of skills where education really matters, a particular kind of education. So does Facebook have a bunch of engineers who went to great schools? Yes. By the way, 30% of their engineers went to no college at all. So they're coders. So was a changing scene out in the world in terms of what was valued. And I felt that that message just hadn't had enough of an impact on parents to turn them away from a heightened attention to anything metric. So that's why I wrote the book.
So fascinating. So Madeline, to me, it's incredible. You named the first part stuck. And you say that despite all of our best efforts, the needle really hasn't moved that much. Why do you say so? Or why do you think that is?
Well, I say so, Charlene, because the numbers are clear that in terms of bringing down rates of behavioral issues, mental health issues, we're doing worse, not better. I just wrote the book on that, and I'm not entirely clear. I think a couple of things. One is when I went to school, those things mattered, and they mattered a lot in my generation, and they mattered in the generation of parents who were raising kids, right? it did matter where you went to school, and it did matter what your grades were. My husband's cousin is the head of neuroimaging at NIDA. That's a part of NIMH. And so I always check whatever I write about the brain with him. And when I was writing this, I said to him, his name's Elliot, Elliot, is there anything that has changed in your hiring in the last 10 years? And he said, absolutely, grades have gone to the bottom of the list. Now, I want to be really clear that he didn't mean grades didn't matter. He meant that they went to the bottom of his list of things like collaboration, of things like creativity, of things like flexibility, of things like curiosity. They still mattered, but they weren't at the top anymore. And because there's lots of smart kids. And, like the thing with my son, there were lots of kids who on an interview he went to an ordinary college, who would look like smarter than him, but it wasn't what mattered, and it isn't what matters anymore. And I think part of that is a radical change. It mattered, although Charlene, as you know, when Denise Pope and I get up to speak together, I went to the University of Buffalo, and she went to Stanford and Harvard. And we kid her, like, here we are on the stage together. So I think there's a very persistent mythology about what it takes to be successful. And the other factor I think in here is parents have always wanted their kids to do better than they have done, right? And so I came from a very working class family, first people to go to school and get degrees. That may not be the case for my own children, who are 3 millennials and grown and married and stuff like that. So I think parents are fearful about the experiment of valuing this, what's called a soft skill set, which, as you know, I hate. So I call it a foundational skill set. So I think they're worried about how their kids will do. And by the way, when I talk about how anxious kids are, adults, parents have the same elevated rates of anxiety, right? So it's about a third of kids and a third of adults who will end up with an anxiety disorder over the course of their life. So I think we're anxious, and I think a lot of parents are not yet convinced that there are things that will serve their children equally well and will make it more possible for their children to do well. Excuse me. I have a patient who is a brilliant advanced calculus student in high school, and his father graphs every single grade that he gets. Now he's in advanced calculus or honors calculus, I guess it is. And why is the kid in my office? Because he has what we call trichotillomania. So he's pulling out his eyebrows and his eyelashes and the hair on his arm and the hair on his head, which is a way of coping with anxiety. And, I say to the father, what do you think of this as a result of this tremendous pressure to be successful? And the dad says to me, he will stop this when he gets into MIT. And the reality is he will not stop it when he gets into MIT, because that's become his go-to coping mechanism. And I think what interests me is understanding the cost of so much pressure, so much, as one kid in my practice said to me, I'm only as good as my last performance. And, I've got a lot of parents here. Think about what that would be like for you at work if everything you did was evaluated, right? If somebody was looking over your shoulder at every attempt you made. And, as a writer, your first drafts, they're really not good. And the way they get good is you write it over and over again. And if I had somebody looking over my shoulder at the beginning of any of those books, it would be crushing. And I think that's what's happening to kids. And I think it's been hard to understand the actual mental health cost of a singular focus on metrics. Yeah, so those are some of the reasons. And nobody does well under uncertainty. Nobody makes good decisions under uncertainty. Our brain is very unhappy under conditions of uncertainty, and we make bad decisions. We tend to make decisions that are in line with our communities. So your community matters a great deal. And what you need to do is move uncertainty into a place where it's not dictating bad choices.
You know, that was actually my next question, Madeline, is you say that we, especially parents, tend to get more conservative making decisions in the face of uncertainty. And obviously those decisions impact our kids. How can we kind of dampen that anxiety that we parents get about where should our kids go to college? What's the best extracurricular? Should they have an internship? All those things weigh on us.
Right. I think, look, if you're an anxious parent, and I raised 3 kids, I certainly was anxious. We're all anxious, right? We all want our kids to do well. I like something the military taught me, which is you don't say failure, you say trial and error learning. And so the idea that that learning is a great, it's how you get to where you need to be. And if your kid can't afford to get a C or disappoint you, your kid should disappoint you in some ways. And you have to learn, because it means they're taking some reasonable risks. Reasonable risk taking is an important thing to do. Kids need to have the space to explore. And if our anxiety is high, think of it this way, think of it as co-regulation. So when I started speaking, I was very afraid of flying. At 3 young kids, I was terrified. And I knew what I did every time I flew was, as soon as we hit turbulence, I looked right at then we called them stewardesses. I looked right at the stewardess, which is what they were. And she was cool. She was fine. She was giving out her peanuts. And so I borrowed her calm. She's calm. I think I can be calm. And after having enough practice in co-regulating with somebody who didn't know I was co-regulating with them, I became capable myself of, now I fall asleep on takeoff and I'm fine with it. But if let me see how I want to say this. Most of my talks look like they're for children, right? I'm a parenting expert, but I think my books and what I have to say are really about parents more than they are about kids. Because to the extent to which you're anxious, to the extent to which your kid comes home from school and you meet them at the door, it used to be with how'd you do? How'd the math tests go? Now, often it's something like, people wearing their masks. Does anybody have COVID? This is not the way to welcome children back into a loving, stable, secure, seen and soothed environment. The 4 S's of child raising: stable, secure, seen, and soothed. And that's the environment you should be working on creating for your kid. And if you're not feeling it, and we all don't feel it some of the time, go into the bathroom and yell into a towel. Go have that ice cream that you swore you weren't going to have. I mean, everybody during COVID had to get into their toolbox of skills and figure out how they were going to manage through this. And I think for many of us, certainly for me, I learned that I had a pretty good toolbox, but it was slim. I have a problem, I write. So in the beginning, Charlene, it was like, oh yeah, I can write for 2 or 3 weeks, no problem. And now it's over 2 years. So that wasn't enough. So there were a couple of other things that I worked on, and that's the job. It's not just about the next step. It's about making sure that your kid is prepared for this pandemic, the next challenge in their life, The last place I spoke before lockdown was a private girls' school here in San Francisco. And for whatever reason, I just asked the audience, how many of you have not had a divorce, a sick parent, a sick child, a bankruptcy, an accident, you know, the list of life. And that was about 400 people. Everybody but one person in that audience raised their hand. And it was just such a visual reminder that we want only the best for our kids, but life is tough and life will hand them challenges. And to the extent to which we prepare them for the challenges of life, as opposed for the challenge just of the SAT, they're much better off and much better able to handle life. Handling life like anything else takes practice.
Oh, so true, Madeline. So what then, speaking of protective measures, what is the impact of that impulse of parents to sweep, like the sweepers in curling do at the Olympics, to clear the path for our kids? How does that impact the kids?
So it's a bad idea. And you know that from everything I've said or written. It's a bad idea, but I want to actually take this opportunity to explain exactly why I think it's a bad idea. One of the reasons that most of us, whether we're clinical or academic, feel that kids are not doing well in terms of your earlier question is because there has been a great deal of accommodation to anxiety by parents. And what I mean by that, it's easiest, I'll give you an example. So your 8-year-old walks home from school one day and the dog down the block starts barking like crazy. And he comes into the house and he's teary and frightened and says, "I'm never walking past the dog again. It scared me." And every one of us have had multiple experiences of seeing our kid teary and frightened. What do? The impulse is too often, "Don't worry about it, honey. We'll take the car tomorrow. We won't have to walk past the dog." Mm-hmm. Why is that such a unhelpful thing to do for a child? It's unhelpful because learning how to navigate his anxiety around something little, a barking dog, has been stolen. It's a robbery on the part of the parent of the opportunity to learn how to navigate. Now, that doesn't mean you say, "Hey, you know, man up and just walk past that dog. I don't care how upset you are." It does mean that you need to scaffold without accommodating to the anxiety. And what would that look like? That would be being empathic with his fear. It might be a little bit of cognitive behavioral, like, you know, has that dog ever hurt you? Or how scared are you? Something like that. And then you might walk with that child for a day or two. But you don't get in the car. You don't take away the opportunity to master fear, because when you do that, I mean, I feel like I've seen a lot at this point. And so when I was in graduate school, Charlene, there was no such concept as emerging adulthood. There are now emerging adulthood programs all over the country. And they're really for kids who have not been able to master the anxiety, which is, you don't have to even go looking for it when you're a child. You know, lots of things make you anxious. Your first dance, your first test, your first girlfriend, you know, your child will find anxiety. And it is really a learning experience. Charlene, you know, I used to say this a lot, that we're not bad with young children, right? So I have a granddaughter now, and lights me up. So have fun, Charlene. And I see when she learns to walk, just like with my own kids, like your own kids, nobody is upset. Nobody is picking her up and saying and moving her legs. She falls down. We clap for her. "Yay, get up, Emery, do it again." And she walks a few more steps. "Yay, that's terrific, honey." And we hug her. And that experience of failing is exactly why she learns how to walk. And we need more trust. That's trust, because we've seen a million babies, fall on their butts and then get up and learn how to walk. That the practice from that is exactly what she needs to learn how to walk. The practice from overcoming that fear about the dog is exactly what a child needs, with varying degrees of support from you. They may need a lot of support. You might have to walk with them for a week, or they may need very little. Honey, I think you can do it. What do you think? And they say, yeah, okay. So that's really the heart of why I think these rates are escalating, that as we became more and more focused on grades and making sure our kids did well, we neglected the other part of development, which is learning to deal with what life throws your way. How many parents I have who really do their kids' homework, who really, they say they're editing their high school or college applications, they're writing them. They are stepping in with all good intentions to the space where they feel their kid is struggling. And it's not like I didn't have this experience. We've all had this experience of my same kid, Jeremy, was invited to a rock climbing camp when he was maybe 10. And he had asthma, and there was no hospital there. His asthma was under control. He desperately wanted to go. He breathed fine that week. I don't think I took a breath till he came home. But sometimes we have to learn how to tolerate our own anxiety for the benefit of teaching children that anxiety will come your way and you can handle it. Otherwise, you end up with the kinds of kids I see who are at college and they don't like their roommates, so they're coming home, or they don't like the food and they're coming home, or there was a mouse in the dorm and they can't stand it, so they're coming home. They have not had the practice of meeting challenge.
Oh, Madeline, that's so well said. Parents, I want you to hear that the subtle difference she's making here. We all want our kids to succeed, but when you take those experiences of them away for them to have what she calls trial and error learning, you're robbing them of that ability to do it for themselves. And we all do want our kids to do well, but if your kid doesn't like gravy, they can't come home from college.
I have one case, Charlene, of a kid who didn't like sauce. I think that's in this book, actually. And her mother accommodated it. Like the whole family never had anything with sauce on it. And then it's in there. Okay. And then when the kid starts getting invited to friends' houses, the mom has to call up and say, you can't make anything with sauce. And very quickly her invitations disappear because that's crazy. And so we see this in little ways and we see it in big ways. And I think if you can start thinking of challenge as your child's friend, as opposed to something that gets in the way, you're far more likely to have a child who is robust and who can deal with what life sends their way.
It is so true. And again, parents, Madeline and I don't like that word failure. We know it's a big word in Silicon Valley, fail fast, right?
No.
But there's so many other positive ways to frame the journey, right?
Right. And so I've been talking about this for years, and I never could get the word failure out easily, because as a mother, it's like, oh, have your child fail. It's like, no, because it never came with a sense that there was real value in it. And yes, you're down in San Mateo. That seems to be part of the legacy. So again, I have a quick story. I was invited to a group of very young CEOs who were doing a team building exercise. And I had no idea what they would do. It was in code. I had no idea what they were doing. I corrected their spelling, but they were in competition with each other. And what was phenomenally interesting to me was at one point, the team I'm part of goes, we've got it. They didn't have it. They absolutely did not have it. So I say, you don't have it. You have maybe 75% of this solved. And they're like, that's good enough. If it's not right, we'll do it again. And that was a huge learning lesson for me in terms of a fearlessness around, okay, maybe I don't have it right, but I'll have another shot at it. And that is also part of Silicon Valley, which is why I said, kind of educated risk-taking. I don't know what else to call it, but, not stupid risk-taking, like jumping out in cars or doing heroin or anything, but educated risk-taking. Carol Dweck's research on kids who do well at puzzles, when they're willing to make a mistake, when you haven't already told them how brilliant they are at it, when you just go let them play, they do so much better because they're willing to fail and fix it and iterate, as they say down there, and reiterate.
So Madeline, in this important second part of your book, Course Correction, you talk a lot about 21st century skills and what you call foundational skills. Bev and I also don't like that term, soft skills, because they're so important. So if you would tell us a little bit about what you mean by those foundational skills and why they're important.
So, I think I've named some of it. I hear myself saying curiosity a whole bunch of times. Collaboration is critical. I think a kind of flexibility, which is the ability, it's not only the ability to get up again, but it's also the ability to see things from different points of view, which if all you're doing is looking at metrics, there's a right answer and a wrong answer most of the time. And I think that works against seeing things from different points of view. So critical thinking is really important. The other thing that I believe is incredibly important is knowing how to be of service. And that's why I told that story about my son. At the beginning of COVID, I still can't see people in my office. So I have a little garden out there, and I used to have a stream of kids. I'm depressed, I'm smoking weed, I don't know what to do, I have no social life. And I'd like to say that I'm such good experienced, as you would say, psychologist, that I was incredibly helpful with my interpretations, but it wasn't that. What helped these kids was I finally made a list of all the organizations around town here, because most of the kids were here, that needed help. Jewish Family and Children's Service, Catholic Family and Children's Service, Meals on Wheels. There were tons that needed help. And the deal was I would see the kid if they would be of service. And that was like genius. that did it. And they had to report to me twice a week, just a phone call. And they got so into it themselves that became unnecessary after a while. So, you can call it empathy or compassion or service, but being aware of something other than yourself, other than your grades, other than what school you go to, being excited about making a contribution and feeling that you can make a contribution. And I'm just incredibly sympathetic, particularly with high school age kids. I think we underestimate them tremendously. I spoke at a school in San Francisco, which was a progressive school. And they told me that the kids were going to do the evening. They were going to send out the invitations and the Zoom link and all that. And I'm like, oh my God, the kids are going to do it. That's going to be a disaster. And it was fabulous, absolutely fabulous, because the 7th and 8th graders were absolutely capable of pulling that off. And I think my experience treating kids in middle school is they often feel that they don't have a place, and they're not really needed for anything. And there's so much they can do. They can cook, they can clean, they can be of service, they can do all their own stuff. But I think as a country, we underestimate what our young people will do because we're doing that snowplow thing. And making sure life is easy as opposed to life is interesting.
So Madeline, I have one last question before we open it up to you, the audience, and some great questions are coming in. This is tied to a wonderful quote that you included towards the end of the book. I will read it. This is an African proverb. If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I've heard you talk, well, for almost 20 years now about the 30-year plan. If you would talk to parents just for a minute about what you mean by that. What is the long game when it comes to parenting?
Right. So I've told you my kids are grown and married, and one of them has 2 children, young children. And what life looks like from this vantage point, they're all millennials, is so different, even for me. You know, I worried about where my kids went to school. I worried about their grades. I worried about the team they were on, to varying degrees, not so much by the third one, but in the beginning. And I can't tell you enough what it means to have kids in good relationships, who are good parents, who are kind and respectful to their spouse, their friends, their parents. It makes everything else, like, I can't believe, I sometimes think my oldest kid, Lauren, I transferred him from Brandeis to the public school, and I sent him for testing, and like, could he do that? Could he make that? And just an inside thing, they said no. They said no, he needs to be in this private school. And I pulled him out, and he's a lawyer in a great marriage with 2 wonderful children. So that was all wrong. But the amount of time and energy and worry that went into that, when I look at this young man now, this dad now, it's meaningless. So the 30-year plan, something Ken Ginsberg and I talk about a lot, is each moment feels like a photo, right? It's like, what's happening today? Did they make the team? Did they not? Are they in the play? Did they get a lead role or not? What are they doing? That's really not a good way to look at your being a parent, at raising children. Hopefully you've got 60 years. You will still be a parent, even when your kids are grown and have children of their own. But if you think of it as a movie, as opposed to a bunch of still photographs, feels to me like liberating. Like, what does the movie look like? What does the big picture look like? Not, what grade did your kid get yesterday? So that's my 30-year plan. Now it's closer to a 40-year plan. I'll have to change that slide.
No, it's so true, Madeline. I think about my firstborn is expecting his first baby this weekend, and my heart is full. That's why we do this, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, Bev, just let me add the other thing. I'm still thinking about your question about why I got into this. And I lost a parent at a young age. I was 17, and I think, and we had no money. We were on welfare. And I think my feeling about the world, and I'm fairly optimistic, but is that it's challenging. And so what I was seeing back then were these kids who were pressured beyond belief. And it was like, gee, life is tough enough without putting this kind of burden on young children. I think that had that lived experience had a lot to do with why I went into a helping field. Life is tough enough. We don't need to make it tougher for our kids. And some of what we think is making it easier is actually making it tougher.
Well, we have a very kind audience tonight. I got some congratulations. And here is Dan wants to know did your son go to work for that bank?
What a great, thank you, Dan. He did. And he hated it so much. He hated banking so much. He's now a lawyer. Which he actually loves. He's at City Hall. But there, I hadn't thought of it that way. There's the squiggly path again. Yeah, he did.
Okay.
And he was on track. I think this is an important little story. He was on track for management at some high position, and that's not what he wanted to do. So he tried it. He didn't like it, just like I tried teaching. And you learn as much about the things you don't like as the things you do like. Yeah. So.
Oh, is that true? My son is actually an attorney in recovery running a company. All right, Madeline. These are good questions. You've talked about this tonight, but a parent asks here, Amy, can you give some practical tips on how to help and prepare our kids to deal with uncertainty?
Yes. So as I said, our brain doesn't like uncertainty because uncertainty lives in our limbic system, where aggression and I'm holding my head, I see, where aggression and anxiety and uncertainty, all those kind of negative things live. And part of what makes it easier to deal with uncertainty, which is probably task number one for the brain. I mean, think for a minute about what it would be like if you couldn't predict what time your child has to wake up, what time you have to wake up, where your school is, where the drop off is, what time you pick them up. You know, like most of our lives is our habit and are things that we don't have to think about. But when you have uncertainty, you don't have that luxury. So it's living in your amygdala, in your limbic system. And I think one of the most helpful things to do is to bring that forward into the prefrontal cortex. And what does that mean? It means meditation. It means deep breathing. It means writing it out. I think everybody should think about writing out their narrative for this time. This will be in the history books. It's not just the pandemic, it's what's going on in the country and in the world and the loss of civility, and there's so much going on. And I think it helps. And if your kid's old enough, it helps to have your child write out what this was like and how did you get through it, because your children, your grandchildren and their grandchildren will be reading about this. I really do believe that this is an incredibly important time in our history. So that's writing brings it forward, because you have to use judgment and planning to write. We talk a lot, as I'm doing tonight. We talk a lot, and the reality is unless your body is got some equilibrium, your mind won't. So you got to calm your body down before you can calm your mind down. Your body knows it first. You know, we've all had the experience of jumping back from a car. That's your body knew it before you even saw the car. So it's really funny, Charlene, because for all these years, I always said, you know, you should meditate. It's really good for you. The research is there. And I never did, but I do now. 10 minutes, that's it. But I find it helpful. You know, put your hand on your heart, bring your temperature down. And you can teach. I have one family, the whole family is doing meditation before they go to bed. They love it. And so teaching that to your kids, you'll like this, Charlene. My 3-year-old granddaughter, when she gets upset, which is with some regularity at 3, she'll say to me, "Grandma, I have to go to my room and breathe now." And it works. Like so young children are being taught some of these self-soothing, you know, we call self-soothing, calming things to do. And it is an incredibly helpful thing. I'm shocked that at 3, she knows how to do that, but it's welcome. So those are the kinds of things you can help your kids with.
That's great advice. I like the breathing a lot better than putting kids in the corner on a chair.
Right. No, they
never a fan.
It's so interesting to me, Charlene. I mean, I put my kids had time out. My grandkids never have time out. They have to go breathe. Okay, great. It seems to me it's a lot more effective.
All right. So I see.
And that would be true. I think, you know, the one thing I haven't said, and I see there's a question here about it, is prayer. And I think prayer does a lot of the same things that meditation does, that self-reflection does, that it's an opportunity to be internal and think about something that you need to calm yourself down. You know, the research, I had asked Dr. Peterson earlier about how faith-based schools are doing compared to other schools at this time. But the research is faith-based schools in general do better than schools that are not faith-based. And I think that, you know, I said, what are the 4 S's? Stability, safety, soothing, and what was my fourth one? Stability, safety, soothing, and whatever the fourth one is. I think a faith-based community provides a lot of that. So, I'm appreciative of what that can offer kids and parents.
All right, we have time for one last question and then we're going to wrap. Madeline, a parent asks, how do you encourage empathy in a child who is not perhaps naturally wired that way?
There's an awful lot that we don't know about, right? So is a child not wired to be empathic? Are some children more empathic than others? Are some children more resilient than others? Yes, yes, of course. If you've had more than one child, you know how different they can be. But there's a field called epigenetics, which is, I describe it this way, genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger, right? So things like empathy, your kid is more or less empathic. Can you teach them to be more empathic? Absolutely, by the environment. So how do you do that with a child? It's to direct their attention, I think, to how they would, if they're young, how they would feel in a situation, because kids are naturally self-centered. That's okay. That's all they know about and all their needs are being met. But if your kid comes home, I think the story's in there, and somebody broke their skateboard and, they're like, I'm going to get him. I'm going to break his skateboard. Don't start with, no, you're not going to break his skateboard. I think you start with, how do you think he feels? What would you feel like if your kid is saying, I'm going to go break his? What would you feel like if you accidentally broke somebody's skateboard and then they intentionally broke yours? So I think with young children, you're always trying to say, how would you feel if? And the other thing I think parents need to do is share their own experiences. I was thinking about this earlier about failure, but I think it relates to this too. When I was on the road, and I was on the road constantly, I call my kids after every event, and I would tell them what didn't go well. And I didn't make a big deal out of it. It was just like, oh, it was great today. I was in Omaha and blah, blah, blah. And I tripped on my way up the stairs because something always went wrong. The slides weren't there, or I tripped on the stairs, whatever. And so letting kids see that like adult life still demands all these kinds of resilience. Yeah, I stepped, but that's okay. Nothing happened, or somebody helped me out. And I think the same thing is true with empathy. In my house, and this is incredibly important to me. So there's something in here which we haven't got to, which is values. And if I leave a tip, it's to do a values exercise with your family, because that says that's what you're interested in. And if you put down compassion or prayer and you don't do it, then you're not going to teach it to your kid. But kids really learn by modeling themselves after the people who mean most to them. So you point out when you're being empathic. You give your child lots of chances to be good. We tend to focus on when kids are bad. Focus on when they're good. Focus on when they're doing the right thing. Congratulate them for the empathy they just showed towards somebody else. So,
well, I think that's a brilliant place to end the conversation. Thank you so much, Madeline Levine, and I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Peterson to wrap up the evening. So I think you might be on mute.
Sorry. Thank you so much. It was a great evening. As always, parent education series hit it out of the ballpark. And all the chats were like, this was wonderful. I think your heartfelt message and having lived it and breathed it, it made it more impactful for all of us. And being familiar with our area, it, just helps, right? How we are and where we are. So I loved it. There were so many things. I think we have been working here at the school, just being kind to each other, saying hi in the hall. I loved your statement on, did you wear your mask? Who was wearing their mask? Who wasn't? And what message do we really want to ask our children when they first get in the car, right? Were you kind to someone? What did you do for someone in that service space? So great messaging. There were many. I just did a few. So we are very lucky to have the St. Matthew's community to have this one-on-one session. It was very valuable.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for everyone for giving up your hour. I appreciate it. And, go put those kids to bed and share your story. Take a moment to share your story.
Thank you so much, everybody. Glad you could join us tonight. Thank you, Madeline Levine, as always. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon. Good night.
Good night.